Chapter 861, Successful Refinement. Star Form Blessed Land. Poisonous fog was spreading, poisonous blood was boiling, 3 layers of goo formations were already destroyed by corrosion, the surrounding land turned into a thin layer of poisonous swampland. Fong Yuan's face was stern. Next is the most troublesome and difficult to process immortal material, earthly limit astral chi. He took out an immortal material and held it in his hands. This goo refinement material was very peculiar, it was made up of soil and chi. They gathered into a lump. At the top was light azure-colored astral chi, below was black soil. Astral chi was the heaven chi found up in the 9 heavens. Outside the immemorial 9 heavens was a thick wall of astral chi. If a goo immortal wants to explore the 9 heavens, he would need to break through the astral chi wall. Meanwhile, the black soil was made up of the essence of earth chi condensed from the 10 depths. Heaven and earth chi could not coexist, but at this moment, this earthly limit astral chi was joined together in harmony. Not only were they existing peacefully, they were converting into one another constantly. Black soil turned into astral chi while astral chi turned into black soil. Fong Yuan shook it by moving his hands rapidly, as this lump of earthly limit astral chi melted, fusing with the black soil and becoming a lump of fog. But after shaking, after a dozen breaths, the black soil sank while the astral chi stayed on top. Black and white was separated again, the two were rotating, it was a mystical sight. Processing such an immortal material is most troublesome. Ordinary refinement path killer moves cannot deal with it perfectly. Only the 4 publicly recognized strongest immortal killer moves to deal with immortal materials, slumbering lightning python, reflect snow, muffled thunder stone drum, and wind grind, could complete this step instantly. Unfortunately, I do not have any of these 4 immortal killer moves. To process the earthly limit astral chi, I can only put in much time and effort. Fong Yuan's thoughts flashed as he moved his feet, his huge body shot into the air, he leaped and jumped into the turtle shell, into the poisonous blood. Boom! Fong Yuan flashed his sharp nails, causing injuries on his 6 monstrous arms, he next slashed at his chest, back, and other areas, creating openings on his skin. Blood refinement killer move, blood trace travel. From these injuries, traces of blood appeared. The blood traces quickly fused into the dark purple poisonous blood, the poisonous blood in the turtle shell was drawn away, it moved into Fong Yuan's wounds. Intense pain assaulted him, Fong Yuan snorted. Immortal zombies did not have a sense of pain, Fong Yuan could feel pain because he used goo worm methods. He needed to feel pain so that he could know what step the immortal materials were at. Fong Yuan's blood and the poisonous blood in the turtle shell acting as a pot continued to fuse and circulate, they were entering and exiting Fong Yuan's body. After this process stabilized, Fong Yuan took out the earthly limit astral chi and swallowed it. Gulp, the earthly limit astral chi entered his stomach. This was his own original method, created in his previous life, an abnormal technique using blood path to refine goo. He called this the flesh-body blood refinement technique. The earthly limit astral chi entered his body, it was engulfed by the blood and slowly melted into the blood. Blood flowed out of Fong Yuan's body through the wounds, into the turtle shell pot, and sank to the bottom. At the same time, the other poisonous blood in the pot flowed into Fong Yuan's body through the wounds, engulfing the earthly limit astral chi again. Such circulation made the earthly limit astral chi melt at an extremely slow speed. At a mountain peak on Truyang mountain range, winds were blowing wildly. The hairy man Gu immortal, Yumu Chun, stretched out a finger. Where his finger pointed, 5 or 6 tornadoes slowly approached. When they got close to a certain extent, they gathered into one, forming a huge tornado that howled loudly. Yumu Chun's hand turned, a pearl-like immortal material was flicked out by his finger, entering the huge tornado. Although this pearl was small and inconspicuous, after it entered the tornado, it emitted a shrill noise. The winds of the tornado became weaker, it spun slower. It was like a strong man who was stuffed from eating. But as time passed, the tornado became faster and faster, it was rapidly digesting the pearl. 15 minutes later, the tornado completely absorbed the pearl, the entire pillar was dyed in black and white, interchanging between the two colors. Earthly Limit Astral Chi Pearl. Ben Duo-e saw this and had a thought, he cried out. Yumu Chun was a bit surprised, he praised, you have quite some knowledge, lad. To process the Earthly Limit Astral Chi Pearl, a small tornado would not work, only a large tornado could do it. Ben Duo-e suppressed the shaking of his heart. Earthly Limit Astral Chi was a very hard to process immortal material. Ben Duo-e knew deeply that even if he exerted himself, he would need to spend several years to melt a lump of Earthly Limit Astral Chi, so that it could be used in Gu refinement. He was a mortal Gu master, to process immortal materials, he would usually need to spend years on it. As for the Earthly Limit Astral Chi Pearl, it was made from a huge amount of Earthly Limit Astral Chi, squeezed together and gathered into a pure pearl. One pearl was equivalent to 100 portions of Earthly Limit Astral Chi. Earthly Limit Astral Chi pearls were extremely firm, they were hard to process. Even Gu immortals needed to spend months or even years to melt one pearl. But Master Yumu Chun spent such a short time to process an Earthly Limit Astral Chi pearl. Ben Duo-e thought of something, his voice trembled as he asked, "Don't tell me. Master Yumu Chun, the refinement path killer move that you used is the legendary wind grind?" "That has to be it, only one of the 4 legendary refinement path immortal killer moves can process immortal materials at such a speed." "That's right, it is wind grind," Yumu Chun replied. Ben Duo-ye's eyes were shining brightly, this was one of the best methods to process immortal materials. Even if he was not a Gu immortal, and could not use an immortal killer move, but right now, he was filled with admiration, he dreamed that one day, he would be able to use wind grind to perfectly process immortal materials, that would be incredible. After dealing with the Earthly Limit Astral Chi Pearl, Yumu Chun started to throw immortal essence stones into the tornadoes. One after another, immortal essence stones were tossed into the tornadoes. These stones were not as tough as the Earthly Limit Astral Chi Pearl, they were grinded to dust in an instant by blades of wind, they gave off a dazzling light. Right now, heaven and earth was resonating, the surrounding mountains were shaking, the sky was filled with dark clouds, thunder was booming. What is going on? Ben Duo-e was scared and shocked. He looked around and realized that the mound of the mountain that he was on had lights floating around him. These lights were Dao marks. There were some red fire path Dao marks, some blue water path Dao marks, these 2 Dao marks were quite fragmented. There were also earth path and wood path Dao marks, they were slightly more intact. But mostly, there was a type of silver light Dao mark flickering. Rule path Dao marks. These Dao marks were very high in numbers, but they were not arranged in an orderly way. Some were entangled together, densely compacted, while others were scattered around randomly. Ben Duo-e realized that the place where Yumu Chun chose to refine Gu had the highest number of rule path Dao marks. This mound seems ordinary, but it is very extraordinary, no wonder Master Yu chose to refine Gu here. Strange, ordinary mounds would not have so many Dao marks. The more Ben Duo-e observed, the more questions popped up in his head. He felt pressure internally, because the shaking of the mountain was getting stronger, the clouds in the sky were getting darker. A thunderstorm was approaching, a calamity was striking. Even those tornadoes were weakening, they shrunk in size. Yumu Chun raised his head in the sky, laughing loudly as his voice was filled with confidence and grandness. At this moment, his immortal Gu refinement had reached its most crucial step. Come. He pointed one finger at the sky, and another finger at the ground. In the sky, lightning bolts flashed as they gathered together, forming a huge dragon-like lightning python. Lightning was yang, python was yin. The lightning python contained yin and yang. Not only was the wild nature of the lightning curved, it even showed some gentleness. This was slumbering lightning python. One of the 4 refinement path immortal killer moves. Meanwhile, on the ground, countless tornadoes were gathering, forming into a gigantic tornado wind pillar. The wind pillar was tall, almost connecting the sky and ground. The slumbering lightning python slowly moved, descending slowly and coiling around the wind pillar. The lightning was not dazzling, but the scene of the huge python coiling around the pillar had an indescribable beauty that shook the soul. At this moment, heaven and earth chi burst out. An intense sense of danger assaulted Ben Duoyi's heart. Master Yu, what is going on? Why is this situation resembling the tribulation of a Gu immortal? Ben Duoyi shouted. Ah, you guessed right. This is a small problem. Yu Mu Chun said casually. A small problem? Ben Duoyi's eyes were wide open, his mouth was dry. Star form blessed land. Fang Yuan was covered in wounds, the pain made his face distorted, his 8 monstrous arms were inserted into the poisonous blood, his fangs were exposed and his eyes were red, he was breathing heavily like an ox. After spending a total of 3 days and 3 nights, he had finally processed all of the earthly limit astral chi, fusing them into the poisonous blood. The poisonous blood filled the entire pot earlier, but now less than half was left. The most difficult step is over, land spirit, bring those captives here. Fang Yuan shouted. Star form land spirit quickly responded. At once, large numbers of living beings, like horses, bulls, dogs, or boars were all tossed into the poisonous blood. Screaming, growling, and crying could be heard, they blended together. The poisonous blood was extremely thick, like a swamp. After these living beings were tossed in, their intense struggle only made them sink faster. Their blood, flesh, and bones were all being dissolved. Soon, the poisonous blood in the turtle shell was slowly rising in depth. Not enough, not enough. Fang Yuan urged, his red eyes flashed with excitement and cruelty. Land spirits did not care for kindness or evil, they only had obsession and loyalty. Star form land spirit started to toss in large numbers of variant humans. These included hairy men, rock men, snowmen, ink men, egg men, feather men, and mermen. The poisonous blood rose in level, but Fang Yuan was not satisfied, he calculated the time as he shouted again, more, add more of them. At this point, the human captives that he had specially prepared were also tossed into the pot. Ah, spare my life. So painful, the pain is killing me. I will not let you off even as a ghost. Fang Yuan was unmoved, he only focused on the Gu refinement progress. An elderly Gu master was coincidentally tossed to the side of him, he struggled to survive. Fang Yuan raised his leg and kicked this elderly man into a deep part of the poisonous blood. The old man struggled intensely for a few moments, but eventually, only his hand was left on the surface of the poisonous blood, his fingers were like hooks grabbing at the sky, it was like the protest of the weak against heaven and earth, against destiny, carrying intense curses and grudges towards Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan laughed loudly. During this period, the poisonous blood had regained its original volume, it was at the rim of the turtle shell. He began to throw in large numbers of immortal essence stones into the poisonous blood. 100, 200 pieces, he threw them in without hesitation. Countless vengeful spirits were flying on top of the poisonous blood, the poisonous fog was rumbling as the level of poisonous blood declined again. 7 days later, the poisonous blood was almost completely dried up, there was only a small puddle left in the shell, it could not even reach Fang Yuan's ankle. Fang Yuan lowered his body and picked up a gu from this poisonous blood. Change form Immortal Gu, completed. Central Continent, Truyang Mountain Range. Ben Duo Yi sat on the ground, muttering, the tribulation is finally over. The mountain range was partly destroyed, it was like a ravaged battlefield. Be it the tornado wind pillar or the slumbering lightning python, they had disappeared. Rain poured as Ben Duo Yi was drenched completely. Yumu Chun collected the refined Immortal Gu as he threw an information path Gu worm to Ben Duo Yi. Lad, this is my refinement path inheritance, I am leaving it to you. You can learn about nature Gu refinement techniques, but if you do not become a Gu immortal, you cannot use this method to refine Gu. Because this method attracts heavenly tribulations and earthly calamities. Saying so, Yumu Chun stepped on the air and flew into the sky. Ben Duoyi's body shuddered, he knelt down as his eyes shined with a brilliant light, he shouted, Master, don't worry, I will not waste this inheritance. Chapter 862, After Refining Gu. Central Continent, Hu Immortal Blessed Land. Starlight Immortal Gu. Fang Yuan stood on top of a Fang Yuan stone nest, at his will, he activated Starlight Immortal Gu. Immediately, a starlight pillar burst out, shooting into the stone nest. Under Fang Yuan's control, the starlight did not harm anyone, it was very mild. Inside this stone nest, there were many arrangements of Gu formations. Once the starlight pillar shot in, it was dissolved into traces of blue starlight rays, drawn into the first room of every level. The hairy man in the first room activated his Gu worm skillfully, absorbing the starlight trace and processing it. The partly done product was sent into the second room, for the second step. Going through a total of 7 rooms, Star Thought Gu were refined one after another. These Star Thought Gu moved along the tunnels, sliding towards the deepest storage area of the stone nest. Each time Fang Yuan activated Starlight Immortal Gu, the amount produced was enough for these hairy men to work for 8 to 9 days without any rest. After using Starlight Immortal Gu, there would be a huge quantity of starlight. Fang Yuan did not need to purchase Starlight Gu like before and refine Star Thought Gu using the mortal Starlight Gu as material. This saved a lot of trouble, and his costs reduced slightly as well. Even though using Starlight Immortal Gu required immortal essence, if he purchased a vast number of mortal Starlight Gu, he would still need to pay quite a sum, the cost of acquiring them was high. The modified Star Thought Gu recipe was safer as well. Refining Gu was a risky thing to do, it was like battling, that was why a lot of hairy men got injured in the process, or even died. After producing the starlight, Fang Yuan did not leave, he observed them for a while. A while later, he nodded slightly, feeling pleased internally. The current Star Thought Gu recipe was already modified by him, the number of hairy man deaths had greatly reduced in comparison to before. Most importantly, the production of Star Thought Gu did not fall in numbers. But the modification has reached its limits, unless my star path attainment level rises, or if I find a better Star Thought Gu recipe. Fang Yuan knew clearly that he was not a star path cultivator. His star path attainment level might stay at this level forever. Or perhaps, when he explores a dream realm in the future, his star path attainment level might rise. But who could be certain of events in the future? It is a pity, 60% of rooms in this stone nest are empty. If I have enough hairy men, the production of Star Thought Gu can double. Fang Yuan felt it was a pity. Just now, to refine change form Immortal Gu, he not only used up the success Dao mark from the infallible inheritance, he even used up almost all of his immortal materials and immortal essence stones. The result was that Fang Yuan was currently broke. Thus, the problem of a hairy man shortage could not be solved now. Even if he caught and captured wild hairy men, he would need to spend lots of effort and time to train them, until they were proper slaves that could be useful in refining Gu. Fang Yuan did not know how to train wild hairy men into proper slaves. The fastest way was to buy hairy man slaves from other Gu immortals. Regrettably, Fang Yuan did not have the spare cash for that. Even his immortal essence storage was very low now, he had around 10 beads, he needed to use them wisely. One could say that Fang Yuan was in an extremely weak condition now. Even though he had the killer move Myriad Self, 3 new Star Path Immortal Gu, and multiple Star Path Immortal Killer moves of Star Lord Wanxiang, without enough immortal essence, he could not use any of the killer moves. As the saying goes, there is no need for worry if one has ample resources. To Gu immortals, resources referred to immortal essence stones and immortal essence mainly. Thus, the most important thing for Fang Yuan was to accumulate immortal essence now. After leaving this stone nest, Fang Yuan went to inspect the other 2 stone nests. During this period, these 2 stone nests were handled by He Lulan. She activated Strength Qi Immortal Gu, providing the Gu refinement materials for countless hairy men. Large numbers of air sac Gu were created, they contained guts Gu as they were sold to the different forces of Central Continent, or in Treasure Yellow Heaven. In these 2 stone nests, each room had a hairy man. The risk of refining air sac Gu was much higher than refining star thought Gu. Why was the stone nest still at full capacity? That was because Fang Yuan reassigned the hairy men in the 3rd stone nest to fill up these 2 stone nests. Fang Yuan's current focus was on expanding the guts Gu trade. During the Central Continent Refinement Path Convention, Fang Yuan dueled Feng Jin Huang and made an agreement in public. From now on, he was going to sell a large number of guts Gu to Spirit Affinity House. Thus, the demand for guts Gu increased, Fang Yuan had to increase its production. Inside a stone nest, Fang Yuan met up with He Lulan. He Lulan was browsing the information about Central Continent. Central Continent's 10 great sects are secretly trying to capture Song Zixing, have you heard about it? Once they met, He Lulan asked this to Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan smiled lightly, of course I did. This matter can be kept from mortals, but it cannot be hidden from Gu immortals. Even though Central Continent's 10 great ancient sects are concealing their tracks, the other Gu immortals in Central Continent would not want to keep this a secret. Right now, they are looking forward to seeing some drama in the 10 great ancient sections. Sigh. He Lulan sighed deeply, such a prime opportunity, but we missed it. If we could kill Song Zixing during this period, we might be able to obtain star form blessed land. Fang Yuan was silent briefly, before saying, He Lulan, you're simplifying the matter too much. Central Continent is not Northern Plains, we are both Northern Plains Gu immortals, if our aura leaks, others will find out. The consequences of exposing our identities are too severe, we cannot handle it. Song Zixing is also very crafty, he is skilled at escaping, while we have mediocre investigative methods. Even the 10 great ancient sects of Central Continent cannot find him in Truyang Mountain Range, how can we find him? You are right. He Lulan sighed, she replied gloomily. Ever since she was awakened by Fang Yuan, she realized her own shortcomings. These last days, she had been thinking daily about how to manage her blessed land, how could she earn resources and sustain her own cultivation, how could she become more independent. But reality was cruel, it was not easy to start a business. He Lulan was starting from scratch, she needed to spend a huge amount of time and face many setbacks to set up her revenue sources. Even if her plan worked, she would face fierce competition in the market. How much profit she would get would depend entirely on the situation. He Lulan thought about it for a while. She went to Fairy Lishan for advice. She learned that to start a business from scratch, she would make great losses initially, the process would be filled with difficulty, and in the end, whether she earned much or not was uncertain. She might be slowing her own progress. There was no helping it. She had a 10 extreme immortal aperture, the flow of time in it was extremely fast, her heavenly tribulations and earthly calamities were also much stronger. He Lulan investigated and realized, what was best suitable were unique businesses like Daoist Gu, a monopoly market that could be solely hers. Or she could be like Fong Yuan, taking several sources of revenue from Dong Fong tribe. For example, the eerie fire dragon pythons, regretful spiders, dragonfish and others, these were originally taken good care of by Dong Fong tribe. Fong Yuan was only taking over and changing where he sold them. After discovering this, He Lulan was even more attracted to star form blessed land. As long as she obtained it, He Lulan would have a stable foundation. Inheriting Star Lord Wan Xiang's businesses, she would be self-sufficient, it would be enough to aid her in her cultivation. Fong Yuan did not tell He Lulan that he was the owner of star form blessed land. He liked to keep his cards hidden. The Snowy Mountain Alliance would expire eventually, it was uncertain if He Lulan would remain an ally or become a foe. Of course, if He Lulan noticed something and asked Fong Yuan, because of the alliance, he could not lie, even though he could remain silent, that would just act as simple confirmation for He Lulan. He would hide this for as long as he could. That was Fong Yuan's plan. After Yumu Chun refined the immortal Gu, he traveled deep into Truyang mountain range. Ever since he separated from Ben Duo Yi, he had used an immortal killer move to conceal his tracks. On this afternoon, he stopped in front of a small, ordinary-looking valley. He took out an information path Gu worm and tossed it in front of him. The Gu worm vanished, like a rock entering water. There were ripples in the air, they expanded and an opening appeared, filled with blood-red light inside. Yumu Chun did not hesitate, he took a large step forward and entered the spatial crack. At the next moment, he was inside a strange area. The crack behind him closed tightly, Yumu Chun's vision was filled with blood-red light, there was a dark and eerie poisonous swamp, large numbers of skeletons were inside the mud. An intense bloody smell assaulted him. Yumu Chun frowned unconsciously as he said, using so many blood sacrifices, it seems your injuries were severe, Song Zi Xing. Cough cough, I had no choice, it was quite fortunate that I escaped with my life. Come in. At a deep part of the swamp, Song Zi Xing's voice could be heard. Looking at this situation, the hairy man Gu Immortal, Yumu Chun, was actually acquainted with a top-tier demonic path Gu Immortal of Central Continent, Song Zi Xing. They seemed to be quite familiar with each other, they had a close relationship. Yumu Chun moved in familiar fashion towards a deep part of the swamp. This was not the first time he was in this place, he was familiar with the terrain. Eventually, in the blood pool at the center of the swamp, he saw Song Zi Xing. Song Zi Xing only had a head and over half his chest left, the entirety of his body was submerged in the blood pool for healing, only after Yumu Chun came did his head emerge from the pool. Seeing Song Zi Xing, Yumu Chun's expression turned grave, with your injuries, it will be hard to take part in the upcoming crucial plan. Hee, I will just be giving up my life and cultivation, that's all. Song Zi Xing's expression was calm, he spoke in a carefree manner, he changed the subject afterwards, did you refine that rule path Immortal Gu? Using the success Dao mark from the infallible inheritance, combined with my nature Gu refinement techniques, success was certain. But it is a pity, if given more time, I would be able to learn some useful things from this success Dao mark. The success Dao marks in the infallible inheritance are different from ordinary success Dao marks, they are very closely related to refinement path. If I could research upon it, I would be able to create my own infallible inheritance. Yumu Chun shook his head as he sighed. Chapter 863, Elevating All-Out Effort Gu. Hearing Yumu Chun's sigh, Song Zixing sighed as well. The crucial thing is time. If I have time, I can heal and recover my battle strength as well. Unfortunately, time is too tight. It was estimated that we had 10 years left. To think that we need to start now. We have made many preparations these last years, but plans cannot keep up with changes, and Fate Immortal Gu was not completely destroyed. Isn't it normal to have such accidents occurring? Yumu Chun asked. Even Fang Yuan, who had been reborn from 500 years in the future, did not know about the existence of fate. In contrast, Yumu Chun actually knew, and Song Zixing's expression also showed no surprise. Oh right. Yumu Chun thought about something and said, earlier, before coming here, I met with a talented hairy man Jr. and passed him my refinement path inheritance already. Inheritances were a cultural symbol of the Gu master world. Like how during ancient times in China, there was a need to acknowledge one's roots and ancestors. Grand heroes would want to leave their name in history. After people died, huge amounts of jewelry and gold would be buried with them, even servants or wives were buried alongside. During Japan's Sengoku period, warriors would wear glorious armor into battle, they did not care about the dangers of attracting the enemy's attention. As for Rome and Egypt, since ancient times until the present, they also had such cultural developments. Even though they were all different, there was one common point among them, that was to prove that one existed. Proving to the world, proving to others, I had once existed and lived. Even if I died, in the world, this person had once lived. As such, biographies were not hard to understand. Some people wrote their biographies when they were alive, some allowed their descendants to write them after they died. There were some who did not have descendants, their enemies wrote it for them. Biographies written in such situations could often be more factual, they could contain much more detailed descriptions. As the saying goes, often, an enemy knows you better than your family. Biographies written by your enemies would not contain flattery, they could become classics. Inheritances were the same. Biographies detailed a person's life experiences. But inheritances contain the foundation of the strength that a person in order to live in this world. It was their understanding towards nature, their thoughts about the world, and their conclusion of the truth. Like in ancient China, every craftsman would not want to leave behind regrets before dying, they will try all ways to find a successor, they would not want the skills that had been passed down for generations to be lost. Skills, inheritances, these were acknowledgments of one's value, they were the records of one's success in life. After leaving behind an inheritance, even if one died, they can leave behind a mark in the world. Yumu Chun left behind his inheritance, there was an ominous sensation of him being prepared to die. Who would leave behind inheritances? Nobody who was living a great life and had good future prospects would leave behind an inheritance. Under normal circumstances, who would leave an inheritance behind? Teaching everything to a pupil would result in a starving master, it was hard to know the intentions of others, if one was careless, they would gain a competitor. Usually, only when one was at the end of their life, when they knew that death was coming, would they leave an inheritance. For example, Flower Wine Monk, Blood Sea Ancestor, and Dong Fong Chong Fan. Yumu Chun left behind an inheritance, it was evident that in the crucial plan he was taking part in, he had no confidence in surviving it. What grand plan would make this unfathomable refinement path Gu immortal expert feel that he could not survive? What kind of motivation was driving him, making him willing to sacrifice himself? Even Song Zixing, he had just escaped and survived, top tier in Central Continent's demonic path, for this grand plan, he was willing to sacrifice himself. Furthermore, Yumu Chun actually told Song Zixing personally that he had chosen an inheritor for his inheritance. This was abnormal. If Song Zixing had any ill intentions and secretly went to find the inheritor, he could easily obtain Yumu Chun's inheritance and strengthen himself. As for Yumu Chun, if his foundation was exposed, he would be easily dealt with and suppressed by Song Zixing. Yumu Chun actually told Song Zixing about this precious information regarding his inheritance. It was obvious that he trusted him. Such a level of trust was truly unparalleled. Song Zixing betrayed Myriad Dragon Doc. He had a vile reputation, but he could obtain Yumu Chun's trust to this degree. Was it because of his charisma, or were there other reasons? Yes, we should make some preparations. Hearing that Yumu Chun had left an inheritance, Song Zixing was emotionless. He did not have any intentions to seize it. I'll show you something too. Song Zixing smiled mysteriously. At the next moment, there was a commotion in the blood pool as a blood fetus floated up from under the blood. The blood fetus was the size of a foal. Within the fetus, one could see a human-shaped figure, curled up like a baby, sleeping. Yumu Chun saw this blood fetus and his pupils shrunk. He said with some disbelief, This, you actually developed blood demon body separation to this extent? Song Zixing smiled. He showed a proud expression. Even though I did not obtain a complete blood deity immortal Gu recipe, I had collected some blood deity remnant recipes. I made this blood fetus according to the blood deity remnant recipes, with the blood path technique from Northern Plains along with my immortal killer move, blood demon body separation. This was formed. The fake body created by blood demon body separation expends immortal essence to maintain. It has a time limit. But the body that this blood fetus makes does not consume immortal essence. It can be sustained for at least 200 to 300 years. It can cultivate independently and has its own consciousness. It can get stronger by cultivating and become an immortal. In terms of appearance, it will look exactly like me. You are planning to? Yumu Chun showed a look of understanding. That's right, it is not a problem if I die, as long as the plan succeeds. But if the plan fails, there will need a countermeasure for it. Song Zixing needs to live. Even if I am sacrificed, the blood fetus will produce a second Song Zixing. Yumu Chun looked at the blood fetus as he showed an expression of interest. Can I conduct research on this blood fetus? I have just gotten a new inspiration. Of course, go ahead and research. But be careful, the blood fetus cannot leave this blood pool, not even for a moment. I understand, don't worry. Central Continent, who immortal blessed land. Looking at the whole Earth Gu in front of him, Fang Yuan let out a breath of turbid air. This was the second whole Earth Gu in who immortal blessed land. The first one was connected to Immortal Crane Sect, while this one was connected to Spirit Affinity House. Just earlier, he had done the first transaction with Spirit Affinity House. Large numbers of Air Sac Gu carrying Guts Gu were sent over to Spirit Affinity House. Fang Yuan obtained 180 Immortal Essence Stones. It solved his immediate problem for now. Speaking of which, after Fang Yuan and Feng Jin Huang's duel, the truly valuable thing was not the zombie revival technique that Feng Jin Huang gave him, it was the cooperation with Spirit Affinity House. The reason why Feng Jin Huang took out this method as the wager was because although Fang Yuan was an immortal zombie, he could not make use of this technique. But she did not know that Fang Yuan still had his first mortal aperture. She did not manage to complete stump Fang Yuan. With these 180 Immortal Essence Stones, Fang Yuan did not hesitate in converting half of them over to Green Grape Immortal Essence. Like this, he was out of his weak state, he regained his battle strength. A day later, he transacted with Immortal Crane Sect again, gained a favorable sum of Immortal Essence Stones. Immortal Crane Sect attitude was much gentler than before. Evidently, they had understood. if they were too overbearing towards Fang Yuan, he might lean towards Spirit Affinity House instead. At the same time, Immortal Crane's sect wanted to buy the Success Dao mark from Fang Yuan. They offered a huge price, asking him to refine a rank 6 Immortal Gu. They would provide the Immortal Gu recipe to Fang Yuan for free, and the immortal materials would all be provided by them. Even the 10 great ancient sects in Central Continent had an unceasing demand regarding Immortal Gu. Towards this request, Fang Yuan evaded it as much as possible. He did not say that he had already used it, he only said that he needed more time for consideration. Immortal Crane's sect was asking something from Fang Yuan, thus their attitude was obviously nicer than usual. After making these two deals, Fang Yuan used the immortal essence stones in his possession to buy some hairy man slaves from Treasure Yellow Heaven, replenishing the ones that had died from refining Gu. The price of hairy man slaves was not cheap. Fang Yuan's immortal essence stones had just been replenished, but after this, they were all gone again. Thankfully, Fang Yuan had quite a bit of green grape immortal essence now. He was much safer than before. Even though he bought the hairy man slaves, Fang Yuan was only replenishing his earlier losses. He could not expand the scale of the stone nests. Because of the deal with Spirit Affinity House, the Daoist Gu trade had increased in quantity. Using 2 stone nests, Fang Yuan could not accommodate the demand of the market. He planned to accumulate a portion of immortal essence stones and build a 4th stone nest, as well as getting enough hairy man slaves to fill them up. The lack of funds was quite serious. Fang Yuan's 3rd stone nest was built using the funds that He Lu Lan provided. But with Star Form Blessed Land's assistance, and Star Lord Wan Xiang's many businesses of Gu insect transactions, Fang Yuan managed to save quite a sum of immortal essence stones. This caused the time that Fang Yuan needed to accumulate funds to shrink. Fang Yuan accumulated immortal essence stones as he used the light of wisdom to undergo deductions. A month later in Hu Immortal Blessed Land, Fang Yuan successfully fused change form Immortal Gu into vaguely familiar face. Using the attainment level of a Strength Path Grandmaster, Fang Yuan successfully deduced the rank 5 recipe of All-Out Effort Gu. Unlike an ancient Gu recipe, Fang Yuan's deduction made use of Gu refinement materials that could be easily found in the world at present. All-Out Effort Gu was the vital Gu of Fang Yuan's immortal second aperture. All along it had been rank 4, its rank was much lower than Fang Yuan himself. With this Gu recipe, Fang Yuan had a new task, that was to refine All-Out Effort Gu. After failing once, All-Out Effort Gu reached rank 5. If I can raise All-Out Effort Gu into rank 6, then the boost to Myriad Self's power would be huge. It would only be inferior to that of Self-Strength Immortal Gu. Unfortunately, such a thing is beyond my capabilities. After this successful attempt, Fang Yuan tried to deduce the Gu recipe of Small Family Qi Gu. The result was utter failure. Fang Yuan's Qi path attainment was only at ordinary level, he was not even a quasi-master. This was a very understandable result. Chapter 864, Sacred Feather City's Shocking Change. The sky was slightly green, the wind that would not stop in all 4 seasons was blowing gently. In this small world, a huge city was floating in the sky. This was a home for feather men. It was known as the City in the Sky to others, but these feather men called it Sacred Feather City. At this moment, rainbow flags were hanging in Sacred Feather City, cheers and shouts could be heard everywhere. Most of the feather men in the city had gathered around the battle arena in the city. They were watching an important match. The Featherman King had passed away. According to their customs, it was time to select the new Featherman King through battles. Of course, to be a candidate in fighting for the position, one needed to be acknowledged by most of the Feathermen in the city. The Feathermen did not want a fierce or tyrannical ruler, they wanted a compassionate hero. Thus, the Feathermen who were fighting for the position of king had great reputation. they were people who had done good deeds or made immense contributions to Sacred Feather City. In most cases, the evaluation of the citizens was accurate. In the history of Sacred Feather City, very few evil and cruel feathermen were chosen to be king. Even if they were cruel and ruthless, there were 3 Featherman Supreme Elders in Sacred Feather City. They were Gu immortals who could control the situation. In the huge battle arena, tens of thousands of spectators were watching. The cheering was extremely loud. At the center of the arena, 2 youngsters were battling it out. "You Fei, give up. I am the Prince of Sacred Feather City. I will inherit the throne and defend the honor of our Dan surname." A tall and burly Featherman youngster with golden hair sent his opponent flying time after time. This was the final match. The victor would become the new king of the Feathermen. From the current situation, one could see that the handsome Featherman prince had the advantage. He was flying in the sky, with rank 5 cultivation level. He used his Gu worms and attacked from a long range. His opponent was a young Featherman with short black hair. He was thin and sprinted on the ground. He rolled around at times to evade the Featherman prince's attacks. "Dan Yu! Dan Yu!" The spectators were shouting the Featherman prince's name. Their cheers were in unison as they became louder and louder. The situation was very obvious now. Prince Dan Yu had a huge advantage, while his opponent, the poor lad Yu Fei, was taking a beating without any way to fight back. Yu Fei's body was covered in dirt. He looked pathetic, like a rat jumping around on the arena. Meanwhile, Dan Yu was high and mighty. His attacks were very tactical and grand. It was more in line with the expectations of the people towards their king. "You want me to admit defeat? That is impossible. I, Yu Fei, am the man destined to become king." Suddenly, Yu Fei shouted. He burst forth with strength. His legs launched from the ground as he flew up like an arrow, towards Dan Yu. "What? You still had strength left?" Dan Yu retreated anxiously. Yu Fei jumped into the air. Seeing that he was about to get close to Dan Yu, he had no choice but to descend as Dan Yu quickly flew back in vigilance. "Yu Fei, your wings were broken by me, you still want to resist?" Dan Yu looked at Yu Fei who was falling down. He laughed coldly and mocked with some lingering fear. But Yu Fei raised his head. His eyes were shining brightly. "It is not over yet. Look at my killer move, inflated balloon." At the next instant, Yu Fei opened his mouth, sucking in a huge amount of air. Almost instantly, lots of air was sucked into his stomach. His body inflated and became a fat balloon. Yu Fei started to float up like a balloon. The audience was silent for a few breaths of time, before bursting into laughter. Yu Fei's balloon mode was simply too funny. Even Dan Yu was stunned before relaxing. "This is truly your style, Yu Fei. But being a clown will not allow you to become the Featherman King. It is time to lose." Killer move, Blade Wind Strong Slash. Dan Yu's eyes were sharp. His arms were raised up as he made a cutting motion with them in the sky. 2 translucent blades that resembled wind blades flew towards Yu Fei at an extremely fast speed. Yu Fei was still slowly ascending. Much of the audience shouted in surprise. They knew the power of Blade Wind Strong Slash after watching the battle for so long. If this hit landed, Yu Fei would definitely be heavily injured or dead. His stomach would be sliced apart. But at this moment, Yu Fei, who was in danger, had a brilliant light shining in his eyes. He had found a chance to overturn the situation. He suddenly opened his mouth. A strong current blew out of his mouth as he gained some thrust. Yu Fei's speed rose rapidly. He shot towards Dan Yu. "This is..." Dan Yu was shocked. Yu Fei's body quickly shrunk. He narrowly dodged the 2 blades from Blade Wind Strong Slash agilely. Dan Yu wanted to retreat, but his speed was inferior. "Where are you trying to go? If you are a man, fight me with your fists. We will engage in a physical fight." Yu Fei shouted, his body spun around in the air, eventually, his legs grabbed onto Dan Yu. Killer move, coiling tree vines. Yu Fei shouted internally, his legs turned soft, like old tree vines, he coiled around Dan Yu's waist. Dan Yu could not break free, he activated his defensive Gu worm out of reflex. Killer move, crane crossing neck. Yu Fei's head suddenly turned into a crane's head, his long neck coiled around Dan Yu's neck like a long chain, he gripped tightly as his beak stabbed at Dan Yu. Ding! The bird beak hit Dan Yu's head, there was some sparks like he had hit strong steel. Although Dan Yu was not injured, this heavy blow was hard to endure, he was feeling dizzy. Killer move, 6-9 Great Windmill. Yu Fei saw a chance and his head turned back to normal, making use of this, he leaned back exaggeratedly and his head was buried in between Dan Yu's two legs, the two bodies spun around in the sky. The two bodies were tangled together, like a windmill, they rapidly approached the ground. The Feathermen spectators shouted in shock. But the victim, Dan Yu, was hit with the killer move, he felt the world spinning as his mind was in chaos, he felt very dizzy and disoriented, he could not react. As they approached the ground, Yu Fei suddenly retreated. Only Dan Yu was left, crashing onto the ground. With a loud bang, he hit the ground head first, the brick floor broke and shards flew as his head was inserted into the ground, he lost consciousness. The entire arena was silent. They were all shocked by this unexpected result, nobody could say anything. There was only Yu Fei's panting that could be heard. After a while, the hosting Featherman elder gulped, he announced loudly, "The winner is Yu Fei, he is the new king of our clan." Yes. I am finally the Featherman king, I succeeded. Yu Fei raised his arms in the air, shouting excitedly. The audience finally reacted, they cheered loudly and applauded, someone shouted, "Yu Fei! Yu Fei!" The shouting of Yu Fei's name became louder and louder, more and more people joined in. Soon, in the entire arena, no, in the entirety of Sacred Feather City, chants of, Yu Fei, could be heard. Ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha. The young Yu Fei placed his arms on his waist as he laughed with his head held high, he was very happy. But suddenly, he grimaced as he touched his wings with the back of his hand, so painful, so painful. At the other end, Dan Yu, who had fainted, was dug up from the ground by the healing Gu masters, he was given medical swiftly. Deep within Sacred Feather City, 3 Featherman Gu immortals were half asleep, they communicated with their drowsy divine senses. This generation's Featherman king is quite unique, he is quite different from the other kings. He is an interesting fellow. It seems that he has quite the ambition, he wants to expand the territory of us Feathermen. But after he becomes the Featherman king, he should become more mature. The 3 Gu immortals conversed casually. According to past situations, after the new Featherman king was chosen, he would bring much life and innovation to the peaceful Sacred Feather City. If there were no mishaps, Yu Fei would rule the Feathermen in Sacred Feather City for hundreds of years. But at the next moment, before any of the Feathermen could react, a huge mishap occurred. Boom! An astonishing explosive sound shook the entirety of Sacred Feather City. The Feathermen in the city screamed, they quickly flew up. Painful, painful, painful. Yu Fei was caught off guard, he lost his balance and crashed onto the ground, rolling around in the process. Quickly look, this is. The Feathermen at the front saw something amiss, they pointed at the sky and stammered in fear, they could not speak. Immediately after, most of the Feathermen raised their heads, they were shocked to find out that above them, in the green sky, there was a huge crack. From the crack, several figures descended like demonic gods. The 3 Featherman Gu immortals in Sacred Feather City had already reacted. They were startled to awareness as they flew towards the sky. They appeared to face the invading enemies while shouting to their Feathermen citizens. "Be careful, there is a strong enemy attacking. Quick, sound the alarms, defend our homeland. Gu Masters assemble, go to the formation cores and activate the defenses of Sacred Feather City." The entire city was in chaos, fear was spreading. Sacred Feather City had been peaceful for too long, they had no competition with the outside world, it was like life inside a utopia. This caused their defenses to be very lax, and with the crowning of a new king, the non-militarized Feathermen could not respond properly. "All of you, why are you here without any invitations? Please leave. We Feathermen love peace and do not like conflict, but we are not powerless." The 3 Featherman Gu immortals had solemn expressions as they warned the strong invading foes. The invaders did not speak, most of their attentions were focused on their leader. This leading Gu immortal was an old and skinny man, he was barefooted in the sky. There was a white cloth on his head, there were also white bandages on his forearms and legs. The elderly Gu immortal's gaze was deep as he stared at the 3 Featherman Gu immortals. He next sent his gaze behind them, towards Sacred Feather City. "Attack now." The elderly Gu immortal said plainly. "Yes, Lord White Sea Shatua." The other Gu immortals responded together. Battle erupted. There were 3 Featherman Gu immortals, 1 rank 7, and 2 rank 6s, even though they were strong, they could not match up against their enemies. The intense battle lasted for 3 days and 2 nights, one of the Featherman Gu immortals died while 2 were injured, they could only use Sacred Feather City to defend themselves. Sacred Feather City was a huge immortal Gu house. Using the power of the immortal Gu house, they could resist the attacks of White Sea Shatua and the others. Chapter 865, Heavenly Wish. Rumble. The explosions had been ongoing for 3 days and 2 nights. White Sea Shatua's group did not stop attacking for even a moment. Countless mortal killer moves, mixed in with some immortal killer moves, slammed onto the immortal Gu house, Sacred Feather City. Sacred Feather City shook intensely, more than half of its troops had already died, despair was spreading. "Our loss is imminent, we should try and break out of their siege." A Featherman Gu immortal, Zhou Zhong, suggested. Sacred Feather City has already been immobilized by their methods, without this immortal Gu house, how can we break out? The other Featherman Gu immortal, Xingling, asked in return. There were 3 Gu immortals in Sacred Feather City, one had already died, only the rank 7 Gu immortal, Xingling, and the rank 6 Zhou Zhong were left. "Lord Xingling, the situation is critical, I will be frank." Zhou Zhong's expression was solemn. "Earlier, Sacred Feather City became encircled because you were not willing to give up this area, that was why the enemy had time to set up their arrangements. Now, if Lord still refuses to cut our losses short and be decisive, we might lose our lives here. I am not afraid of dying, but there are countless innocent citizens in the city, they will perish too. Even if these enemies spare them, they will train them to become slaves, and they will have to serve those humans for life." Xingling heard these words and finally had a realization. He looked at Zhou Zhong, tears shined in his eyes as he said, "You are right, I was muddle-headed." Zhou Zhong urged him, "Lord, I can understand your decision. Right now, the world is ruled by humans, we variant humans have no place to live in. This world is a fragment world of green heaven among the immemorial 9 heavens, it is isolated from the outside world and is a paradise, we should not give up on it easily. But right now, we have no choice but to abandon it." Zhengling frowned. "Right now, Sacred Feather City is being restricted, if we want to escape with our citizens, there is only one way." Zhou Zhong agreed immediately, "That is right, we have to use the immortal killer move, heavenly wish. Thus, an hour later, the remaining feathermen were summoned, gathering around the arena. I wish, my clan's feathermen, survive. I wish, my clan's feathermen, gain freedom. I wish, my clan's feathermen, have a place to live in the world. Tens of thousands of feathermen shouted, under the guidance of Zhou Zhong and Jingling, the entirety of Sacred Feather City started to shine in a pure white light. The light was a few meters tall initially, but it soon grew and reached dozens of meters. Lord White Xianxia, the other party is making a move, aren't we doing anything to disrupt them? A female Gu immortal, Tang Yongran, asked. No need to worry, I had predicted this situation already. What I want is this immortal Gu house, they cannot take it away. White Xianxia explained as he ordered the rest of them, don't stop attacking, just maintain the status quo, don't interrupt them, let them escape. Northern Plains, Tai by Blessed Land. The sky was clear like crystal, the ground was desolate. Accompanied by Tai by Yunsheng, Fang Yuan went on a tour of this high-grade blessed land. This was not the first time Fang Yuan had come to Tai by Blessed Land, but this was the first time he came alongside Tai by Yunsheng. Only after a Gu immortal placed their immortal apertures down, would they be able to enter it themselves and manipulate it personally. Ordinarily, the immortal aperture was hidden within the Gu immortal's body. But when they placed the immortal aperture outside in the main world, the Gu immortal would be inside the immortal aperture instead. Gu immortals and their immortal apertures were a single entity. When the immortal aperture is placed outside, the Gu immortal cannot leave the immortal aperture and move outside. Tai by Blessed Land was a high-grade blessed land. It has a huge landmass of about 4,700 square kilometers. It had a lot of time path resources. 1 day in the outside world was 33 days inside. Of course, after Tai by Blessed Land was placed to absorb the heaven and earth chi of the outside world, it was connected to Northern Plains. The time flow had slowed down to 12 days. Tai by Blessed Land was well managed by Tai by Yunsheng. Disregarding the float ball tea in the sky, or the Jade Peak bird group, there were large numbers of sky chief clouds that had flowers growing on them in the sky. Sparrowhawks were flying around them. Tai by Yunsheng had already started building his third source of revenue. His first source of revenue was landscape as before. Repairing blessed lands for Gu immortals, and repairing the landscape of the 5 regions, this was Tai by Yunsheng's greatest source of income. Not only could it raise his wealth, he could also build relationships. It was essentially comparable with Fairy Li Shan's Mountain Pledge Gu. Tai by Yunsheng's second source of revenue was the float ball tea. Each season, Tai by Blessed Land would produce a huge quantity of float ball tea grass. This tea grass could be sold to the market in Eastern Sea. With the help of Zombie Alliance's Shark Demon Immortal Zombie, Tai by Yunsheng had already entered their market. But this business had a competitive market, there was little profit. Each season's gains was less than what Tai by Yunsheng earned from helping other Gu immortals repair their immortal apertures. I plan to use Luck Path Mortal Gu as my third income source. There are more than 100,000 sparrowhawks that migrated here, they have wild insects on them, and large numbers of Cloud Path Mortal Gu would be produced from these insects. But all this will depend on my upcoming earthly calamity. If I pass it successfully, and my blessed land gains Cloud Path Dao marks, that would be best. Tai by Yunsheng described his goals and expectations to Fang Yuan. Precisely because of this, he did not move the resources in his blessed land outside. It was to draw out the corresponding earthly calamity, so that after the earthly calamity, Tai by Blessed Land could gain a number of Cloud Path Dao marks. Fortune and disaster coexist. Earlier, when Fang Yuan helped to immortal Blessed Land undergo the tribulation, he moved out almost all of the precious resources. In the end, he faced a blood path earthly calamity, and who immortal blessed land gained blood path Dao marks. If Fong Yuan did not move these resources away, there might have been a change, and other earthly calamities might have showed up. For example, fire path Dao marks that suited the eerie fire dragon pythons, wisdom path Dao marks that suited the regretful spiders, or water path Dao marks that suited the dragonfish. The addition of these Dao marks was very helpful for resources related to them. But there was a flaw in this. When the earthly calamity strikes, these precious resources would suffer great losses. In other words, loss now was for the benefit of the future, they were trying to gain long-term profits. Of course, heavenly tribulations and earthly calamities did not always go as one wished. This was only a possibility. There was a chance that even if Fong Yuan kept these resources, the blood poison carry a flower earthly calamity would still come. In that case, his losses would be huge. After all, heaven's will was unfathomable. Right now, Tai Bai Yun Sheng did not move the resources away, he was trying to lure out the cloud path earthly calamity. Whether he could succeed or not was unknown. Fong Yuan was unsure as well, but he consoled him. I had already used the killer move, time assist luck, on you before the earthly calamity, who knows, you might get what you wished for. Speaking of which, the immortal killer move time assist luck had been modified during this period by Fong Yuan using the light of wisdom. Right now, Fong Yuan was gradually understanding what great use Wisdom Gu truly had. Even though he could only use the light of wisdom, just that alone could push his cultivation journey ahead greatly. Tai Bai Yunxing felt something, his expression changed, the earthly calamity is here. The entirety of Tai Bai blessed land started to shake, large amounts of earth chi burst out from the ground, while small quantities of heaven chi drooped down from the sky. There was a burst of mystical light, as from within the profound light, the wishes and prayers of countless living beings could be heard. I wish, my clan's feather men, survive. I wish, my clan's feather men, gain freedom. I wish, my clan's feather men, have a place to live in the world. The mystical light disappeared. At the western part of the blessed land, there were tens of thousands of feathermen. What earthly calamity is this? Immediately, even Fong Yuan was shocked, he had never seen such a peculiar earthly calamity. Tai Bai Yunxing fell into deep contemplation. What place is this? A featherman Gu immortal, Zhou Zhong, looked around with an expression of vigilance. After using the immortal killer move Heavenly Wish, a strong force teleported all of the feathermen in Sacred Feather City away. An empty Sacred Feather City was left. White Sea Shatua had great foresight, he obtained this immortal Gu house without wasting much effort. Seeing that Fong Yuan and Tai Bai Yunxing were flying over, the featherman Gu immortal Zhengling's expression changed. Oh no! This is a certain human Gu immortal's blessed land. We were treated as an earthly calamity and were teleported here. Zhou Zhong showed an expression of shock. How can this be? Wouldn't our enemies still be Gu immortals? We are facing 2 rank 6 Gu immortals, and one is an immortal zombie with bottom tier cultivation level. What are you afraid of? Zhengling laughed loudly. Kill them and we can obtain this small world. Just like what we wished, even though this place is inferior to the Green Heaven Fragment world, it is enough for our tribe to live. Strike. Zhengling said this as he flew out. When he was thousands of steps away from Tai Bai Yunxing and Fong Yuan, he pushed with his hands. Whoosh! Wind blew, a solid wind wall was formed, it pushed towards Fong Yuan and Tai Bai Yunxing with an imposing aura. This was an immortal killer move that Zhengling poured all his frustrations into. He was unable to do anything to White Sea Shatua, he vented all of his frustrations towards Fong Yuan and Tai Bai Yunxing. Seeing the wind wall pressing at them, Fong Yuan pulled Tai Bai Yunxing behind him and snorted with disdain, a pitiful trick. Myriad Self First Style, Giant Hand. Rumble. The Strength Path Giant Hand pushed forth and destroyed the wind wall, then, with its remaining force, it slammed towards Xingling. Zhou Zhong and Xingling's expressions changed, they looked at Fang Yuan's giant hand like they were seeing a ghost. What? Merely a bottom-tier rank 6 immortal zombie, he actually has rank 7 battle strength. The two Featherman Gu immortals knew that they were facing a tough foe. Xingling's expression was very bitter. If this were to be normal times, he would not be afraid of Fang Yuan. But after an intense battle with White Sea Shatua and the others, his battle strength had decreased by a lot. The rank 6 Zhou Zhong was in an even worse condition. Hold on, we can talk this out. I was rash earlier and attacked, please forgive me for offending you. Xingling shouted, we have our difficulties, we had no choice but to enter your blessed land. He asked them to hold on, but Fang Yuan responded at lightning speed. Not only this, he summoned 5 strength path giant hands and encircled them. Since you are here, don't think of leaving. Fang Yuan raised his head and laughed. Chapter 866, Scheming Against the Feathermen, Yu Fei's Helplessness. Featherman Gu Immortal Xingling had an ugly expression. Sir, do you think we are fish on the chopping block? Why must you force us like this? It must have been tough for you to develop this blessed land. If we destroy all of these resources in battle, would it not be a waste? Are you threatening us? Fang Yuan's red eyes shined with a ruthless light. Of course it is not a threat, but what we are saying is the truth, no. Gu Immortal Zhou Zhong said. Fang Yuan laughed internally. If other Gu Immortals were threatened like this, they might be wary and fearful. These two Featherman Gu Immortals might get their way, but they met Tai Bai Yunsheng of all people. Tai Bai Yunsheng's immortal Gu, landscape as before, was the perfect solution against their threat. The two Featherman Gu Immortals did not know about the existence of landscape as before immortal Gu, thus they said such words. According to Fang Yuan's intentions, they should kill these two Featherman Gu Immortals. But this was Tai Bai Yunsheng's tribulation, Fang Yuan alone could not make the decision. And Tai Bai Yunsheng was a kind old man, his nature was quite gentle and merciful. Thus, Fang Yuan did not speak, he looked at Tai Bai Yunsheng. The two Featherman Gu Immortals also looked at Tai Bai Yunsheng, waiting for the person in question to respond. The mortal Feathermen gazed at the sky with looks of awe, towards the 4 figures in the sky. Earlier, these mortal Feathermen had heard the conversation between Fang Yuan and the Featherman Gu Immortals clearly. Tai Bai Yunsheng's decision was going to influence the fate of these tens of thousands of Feathermen. Some Feathermen were already praying internally, some were gritting their teeth, some were grimacing in pain. Yu Fei, who had just become the Featherman King, clenched his fists, he stared at the sky fixedly. He was originally a commoner, he was not like Prince Dan Yu who knew a lot of secrets. This was the first time he had seen a Gu Immortal. He felt shock and at the same time, a deep sense of helplessness. Tai Bai Yunsheng had been deep in consideration since the Featherman appeared. A Featherman calamity was something Tai Bai Yunsheng had not expected. These were intelligent living beings that could talk. If Tai Bai Yunsheng let these Feathermen go, this earthly calamity would be over. If he did not, they would fight inside his immortal aperture. He might be able to recruit these Feathermen, but there was a huge risk of losing resources if they fought. He could not weigh the pros and cons easily. But no matter what he chose, it was a huge decision. Just as Fang Yuan expected, Tai Bai Yunsheng was quite wishy-washy. Even though this was a critical moment, he could not decide. Seeing Fang Yuan gaze over, he also turned his head, seeking Fang Yuan's opinion with his inquiring gaze. Of course we will battle. Fang Yuan immediately transmitted, replying firmly. You have immortal Gu landscape as before, you do not need to fear your immortal aperture suffering damage. The only losses are your float ball tea, sky chief clouds and other resources. These things cannot be restored using landscape as before immortal Gu. But for this tribulation, you did not move these resources out, you were prepared to suffer losses anyway. Your main source of revenue is landscape as before Immortal Gu, these resources earn little profit, even if you lose them, you can start over again. These feathermen number in tens of thousands, they can be turned into slaves. Feathermen are born with cloud path Dao marks, they are skilled at flying, all of the feathermen elites are flying masters. But these two featherman Gu immortals cannot be allowed to live. Even if they do not primarily cultivate cloud path, killing them would get you a good number of cloud path Dao marks, they can be added to your blessed land. Isn't that what you want? This was an extremely rare opportunity. The two featherman Gu immortals were injured, they had no ways to escape from this place. As long as Tai Bai Yunxing did not open the doors, these feathermen were birds trapped in a cage. Once he killed the two featherman Gu immortals, their immortal apertures would fall into Tai Bai blessed land. This was an extremely rare situation. When a Gu immortal dies and leaves behind their immortal aperture, the immortal aperture would become an isolated blessed land and absorb heaven and earth qi from the world. Just like earlier, after Fang Yuan took Star Lord Wan Xiang's corpse, he purposely went into a deep part of Earth Abyss to place it down. The result was, after placing it down, the blessed land took in a huge amount of earth qi, but very little heaven qi. Because of the drawing in of earth qi, it resulted in an intense tremor in Earth Abyss. If the featherman Gu immortals died, their immortal apertures would fall into Tai Bai blessed land, they would take in heaven and earth qi. But Tai Bai blessed land was different from the 5 regions, this place was completely under Tai Bai Yunxing's control, the heaven and earth qi could not be extracted without his permission. If the immortal aperture could not turn into a separate blessed land, what would happen? There were records of this, in such situations, the immortal aperture would be destroyed, all of the resources inside the immortal aperture would be decimated with it. But all of the Dao marks inside the immortal aperture would be left behind, fusing into the outside world. And this outside world was Tai Bai blessed land. As has been mentioned before, Dao marks were extremely precious, because there was a huge cost to obtain them. Even if the entire blessed land was wrecked, if Tai Bai Yunxing could obtain all of the Dao marks of the two featherman Gu immortals, this would definitely be a huge profit for him no matter what. Fang Yuan secretly transmitted, adding another sentence, "Old Bai, is your kindness acting up again, you want to pass up on such a great opportunity?" Tai Bai Yunxing's expression became firmer, he made up his mind, he transmitted, "Don't worry. Feathermen are variant humans, they are not humans like us. Since that is the case, and we're on opposing sides, let's battle and kill them. As for these featherman captives, I will treat them kindly." After making up his mind, he was about to strike, but Fang Yuan secretly told him to stop. "Hold on, this is a great opportunity, how can we fight just like this? Let's probe them first." Tai Bai Yunxing knew about Fang Yuan's craftiness, he replied, "Then I will have to trouble you." The conversation between these two only lasted for a moment in the real world. Fang Yuan looked at the featherman Gu immortals, he started his deception, "It is not that we cannot let you go, but you have to leave behind these mortal feathermen, they will become our slaves." The two sides spoke openly without concealing anything. Fang Yuan's words immediately attracted an intense commotion from the tens of thousands of feathermen. What? He wants us to become their slaves. Losing freedom is like losing our wings. No, even if I die, I will not become a slave of humans. Don't worry, we have our Gu immortal ancestors, they will not give up on us. That is impossible. The two featherman Gu immortals had a determined expression, they immediately denied it. Fang Yuan was not surprised. Groups of variant humans were more united than humans. Dong Fang Chang Fan schemed against his own tribesmen for his own sake, this would be much more unlikely with variant humans. Man is the spirit of all living beings, they have the highest intelligence, as well as complex thoughts. Variant humans however, have lower intelligence and purer minds, they were not as wicked and scheming as humans. Of course, this had much to do with the situation of the different races now. Right now, humans ruled the 5 regions, they were the strongest. It was hard for variant humans to survive, they were ostracized and suppressed by humans, there were few variant human groups that had precious resources. No matter which region it was, variant human slaves were sold in the market. Among the races, humans held absolute dominance, while variant humans were definitely the weaker side. As the weaker side, if they wanted to survive, they needed to stay united and help each other, that was the only way to withstand external pressure. Thus, the 2 Gu immortals were unwilling to give up the mortal feather men, they had a firm attitude, this was within Fang Yuan's expectations, he could tell that they were very determined. Fang Yuan quickly made a transmission, Tai Bai Yunxing showed an expression of feeling angered and offended, he repeated the words Fang Yuan transmitted to him, "Humph. You feathermen barged into my blessed land for no reason, this is an invasion. Not only did you invade my blessed land, you attacked us and threatened us, now you want to leave. How can you not pay a price for this? Of course, you can fight your way out with these feathermen. If you are strong enough, I will treat this as my bad luck. But if that is not the case, I will make sure to take good care of you all." How could the 2 Featherman Gu immortals have such strength left? If they did, why would they bother using words to converse with Fang Yuan? Even though they could still use the immortal killer move Heavenly Wish. But without the protection of the immortal Gu house, Sacred Feather City, not only did Heavenly Wish need a huge amount of immortal essence, it also needed a lot of time to activate. Under such a situation, it was basically impossible to replicate their act of escaping earlier. Seeing that Fang Yuan was unwilling to relent, Gu Immortal Zhou Zhong had no choice but to emphasize on the importance of the immortal aperture again. If they really fought, both sides would lose out. If we avoid direct combat and focus on dealing damage to your blessed land, at some point, the blessed land would face destruction and attract the winds of assimilation, that would be a bad ending for all of us. Zhou Zhong said with a threatening tone. They did not know about the existence of landscape as before. With landscape as before, wherever the blessed land got damaged, it could be fixed. It would never reach a point where the winds of assimilation are summoned. Under Fang Yuan's guidance, Tai Bai Yunxing flew into a rage. You dare threaten me? Battle it shall be. What am I afraid of? You think I am a coward? I can take you down any time. He showed the demeanor of a battle maniac that could not keep his cool. Fang Yuan showed a wary expression, but refused to relent, he wanted to negotiate more. His actions gave the 2 Featherman Gu immortals hope that they could leave peacefully. After the 2 sides negotiated for a long time, Zheng Ling was the first to relent, he suggested that Fang Yuan's side could be compensated with a huge sum of immortal essence stones. Among the 2 of them, Zhou Zhong was acting as the aggressive party, while Zheng Ling was acting as the peaceful party, they cooperated with much coordination. Fang Yuan looked at Tai Bai Yunxing, as Tai Bai Yunxing got the hint and rolled his eyes, how could this amount of immortal essence stones compare to tens of thousands of feathermen? Fight, fight, they could win at any time. Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yunxing had coordination that was not inferior to the other 2. On the ground, the feathermen were in a chaotic state. They were angered and yet helpless and anguished, this was a cruel world, this was the misery of the weak. Yu Fei shouted at the sky, enough. Even if we die, we will not become lowly slaves. The feeling of being treated as livestock while they were used as bargaining chips in a negotiation was horrible. Shut up. Don't go and antagonize existences like Gu immortals. You are the new Featherman King, you have to think of the clan first. By taunting the Gu immortals like this, are you trying to drive our clan into the abyss? Dan Yu scolded. Damn it, damn it. Yu Fei gritted his teeth, his fists were clenched as his veins surfaced. He listened to Dan Yu's words and fell into silence. To Yu Fei, the change in circumstances happened too quickly, and too suddenly. He who aspired to become the Featherman King had achieved his goal. But this high and mighty position that he had dreamed of, was so tiny and weak at this moment. Gu immortals were really too powerful compared to mortals. No matter how hot-blooded he was, no matter how he risked his life, that gap in battle strength could not be breached. Chapter 867, Squashing a Rank 7 Gu Immortal. Zhengling suggested compensating with immortal essence stones, though Tai Bai Yunxing rejected him. Fang Yuan pretended to think about it. We want Featherman slaves, but you are only offering immortal essence stones. This conflict cannot be resolved. How about this, let's take a step back and decide with our strength. Tai Bai Yunxing's attitude was firm, he showed the attitude of a battle maniac. During the conversation, he had been taunting them by saying, I can take you down at any time, several times. If Shark Demon and the others who were familiar with Tai Bai Yunxing were here, they would think that this Tai Bai Yunxing was an impostor. Zhou Zhong and Zhengling exchanged glances. It was hard to talk to the battle maniac Tai Bai Yunxing, but it seemed like the immortal zombie, Fang Yuan, was in charge of the decision-making. This was not strange to the Featherman Gu immortals. After all, Fang Yuan showed rank 7 battle strength earlier. The two communicated secretly. They both felt that Fang Yuan was much easier to talk to than Tai Bai Yunxing. He was more reasonable. The other party is an immortal zombie. His immortal aperture cannot produce immortal essence, that's why he has a careful nature. We have to make use of this trait. But this blessed land belongs to that damned old man. This old man has quite a fiery temper at this age. It seems his battle strength cannot be underestimated. Be vigilant. Forget it, the situation is in their favor now. Let's listen to what the immortal zombie has to suggest. The two Featherman Gu immortals analyzed this situation. It seemed to them that it was a reasonable understanding of it. But what they did not know was that they had fallen into the trap that Fang Yuan had specially made for them. Please speak. After discussing, Zhou Zhong said to Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan spoke, in the world of Gu immortals, benefits are the most important thing. It is decided by battle strength. We will hold 10 duels. For every duel we win, you will split 10% of the Feathermen to us, but for each that we lose, we will accept only a sum of immortal essence stones as compensation. Zhou Zhong was unwilling. He shouted, be it winning or losing, you are benefiting from it. Fang Yuan smiled lightly and did not reply. Tai Bai Yunxing started howling, why are you complaining? If you don't want this, let's fight. My fists are itching to hit something. I can take you down at any time. If you dare to destroy my immortal aperture, I will slaughter these mortal feathermen first. In the worst case, we go down together. Who is afraid of who? He showed the perfect example of a brainless battle maniac. Zhou Zhong and Zhengling ignored him completely, showing an expression of not wanting to stoop to his level of intelligence. The two started to discuss their decisions using transmissions. Fang Yuan pressured them at the right timing. If you do not agree to this, we will have to battle. These words made the hearts of these two Feathermen immortals jump. They understood clearly that in the current situation, sacrifice was unavoidable. The most logical decision was to minimize their losses. Eventually, Zhengling nodded, agreeing to the duels. But he had a precondition. They had to use the information path immortal killer move that they had to form an agreement, similar to Mountain Pledge Gu, as the restriction on both parties. Regardless of the result, after 10 duels, Fang Yuan's side was not to cause problems for the Feathermen. They had to open the door and let everyone else leave, without any form of obstruction. The Feathermen actually had such an information path killer move, their foundation was quite deep. Fang Yuan was fairly surprised. To start things off, the Gu immortal Zhou Zhong entered the stage for the first duel. On Fang Yuan's side, Tai Bai Yunxing went to battle. He was oozing with battle intent as he showed a bloodthirsty expression. He shouted, "Come, I will take you down in just a moment." Zhou Zhong really was fooled by his demeanor. After all, he was only a variant human, their intelligence was inferior to humans. Most importantly, Zhou Zhong had his reservations. He did not want to sacrifice his clansmen. He did not want any Feathermen to lose their freedom and become the slaves of humans. Thus, he chose his specialty for the duel. "What, you want to compete in flying speed alone?" Tai Bai Yunsheng was shocked. "According to the agreement, we are the first to decide what type of duel it is. Are you going back on your words?" "Humph, I will let you decide this time." Tai Bai Yunsheng showed an upset and irritated expression. The result of this duel was obvious. Tai Bai Yunsheng only had a mortal killer move for flying. The other party not only had wings, they even had an immortal killer move specially used for movement. After seeing the results, the Feathermen on the ground erupted into loud cheers. After all, their freedom was at stake, they could have become slaves. They were very nervous when they watched the duel. "Here are your immortal essence stones." Zhou Zhong laughed loudly. He handed the dozen immortal essence stones to Tai Bai Yunsheng in a proud manner. Tai Bai Yunsheng received them with a gloomy expression, but he was filled with admiration towards Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan is truly good at scheming. The other party paid immortal essence stones, but they are acting like this was a huge victory for them. I am inferior to him. In the first duel, Fang Yuan lost. Fang Yuan went for the second duel. Because he had rank 7 battle strength, the Featherman Gu immortals did not dare to be careless. They sent the stronger Gu immortal Zhengling to duel him. Fang Yuan suggested, "We will compete using speed." Zhengling's expression froze for a second before he agreed. Fang Yuan lost this duel very quickly as well. Zhengling also had an immortal killer move. His speed was twice as fast as that of Zhou Zhong. Meanwhile, Fang Yuan had 3 pairs of true solid bat wings. They were all desolate beast wings. But in this duel, he did not manage to activate the Iron Crown Eagle Strength Immortal Gu at all, thus he had no hopes of winning. Third duel, fourth duel, fifth duel. Duels after duels, Fang Yuan's side had no victories, while the Featherman Gu immortals were winning with 0 losses. The results were one-sided. Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yunsheng's expression became uglier in the process. The 2 Featherman Gu immortals had confident and lax expressions. They were starting to realize that their enemies were all bark and no bite. They were just putting up a front. For example, the immortal zombie Fang Yuan was only rank 7 in terms of attack. He only had mortal killer moves for defense, along with his immortal zombie body's defense. In terms of healing, he only had the basic recovery ability of an immortal zombie. As for movement and investigative methods, he did not have immortal killer moves. Meanwhile, Tai Bai Yunsheng was very rash and haughty, but in terms of battle strength, he was a mess. He only used mortal killer moves. The 2 Featherman Gu immortals felt like they had been scammed. It turns out that these 2 are so weak. If we had known this, we would have fought from the start. Sigh, humans are the most skilled at scheming. We have already used the information path immortal killer move and restricted ourselves. We can only leave this place and cannot attack. Thinking about it, we were too stunned by the earlier human Gu immortal invaders. Due to the foundation of our sacred feather city, we are superior to most human Gu immortals. The 2 of them are quite impressive, but they are not our match at all. Like this, the 2 Featherman Gu immortals won 9 rounds, only the last duel was left. No matter what happened in this duel, after it ended, Fang Yuan's side would not be able to obstruct the feathermen due to the agreement, he had to let them leave. On the ground, cheers of victory were already resounding. The new Featherman King, Yu Fei, had a better expression now. His eyes were shining brightly as he looked at the 2 Gu immortals of the Featherman clan. He had another grand ambition now. I've decided. As long as I become a Gu immortal, I would become a true man. I must become a Gu immortal, even if I need to give up being king, I will become a Gu immortal. Fang Yuan took a step forward as his voice turned very cold. This is the final duel, all 4 of us will fight in a battle of attack and defense. I will attack and you will defend for the first round, and you will attack while I defend for the following round. Our partner can only use healing methods. When one side is unable to continue, they will lose. Zhou Zhong and Zhengling exchanged glances, they frowned as they realized something amiss. Fang Yuan was making the dueling rules to complete display their advantage. Meanwhile, Zhengling and Zhou Zhong could not object to this duel request, they could only accept it. In this case, the 10th duel is the hardest one of all. This is the final round. After we win, we will be able to protect all of the feathermen and leave safely. The 2 Gu immortal conversed mentally as they went forth to battle. Sir, please attack. Zhengling took a step forward, saying. Fang Yuan did not speak, he was 1,000 steps away from Zhengling, he grabbed towards the other party. Rumble. A strength path giant hand tore through space and grabbed at Zhengling fiercely. Zhengling suppressed his instinct to dodge, he activated his defensive killer move as a suit of armor made of light appeared on his body. The armor looked very real, it blocked the strength path giant hand. Fang Yuan's expression did not change, he had already seen this armor made of light in the 4th duel, it was a light path defensive immortal killer move. Blocked. Zhou Zhong shouted happily, it is time for us to strike. Fang Yuan scoffed, Sir, are you forming a conclusion so quickly? My attack is not an instantaneous type, but a sustained attack, I have not ended my attack yet. It is okay, Sir can continue attacking. Zhengling said in a low voice. In the duels earlier, Fang Yuan had attacked as well, Zhengling felt that he could block Myriad's self-giant hand completely. But at the next moment, Fang Yuan showed a ruthless smile as Zhengling's expression changed. Earlier, Fang Yuan had been hiding his strength, only using 1 core immortal Gu. Now, he used all of his core immortal Gu at once. The strength path giant hand was breaking the light path defensive method, as creaking sounds could be heard. Oh no, at this rate, Lord Zhengling will become meat paste. Zhou Zhong was shocked. Zhengling, consider it well, my giant hand is only an attack, it cannot restrict your movement. But if you break out of it now, you will be breaking our agreement. In that case, you will be violating our earlier agreement, and the duels will be voided. Fang Yuan scoffed. Damn it! I'll go all out. Zhengling shouted angrily, he activated another defensive killer move, it was an immortal killer move. 2 immortal killer moves stacked together, blocking the strength path giant hand. At this point, both parties fell into a deadlock again. Indeed, he is just a rank 6 immortal zombie, how can he fight a drawn-out battle with Lord Zhengling? Zhou Zhong calmed down. But a moment later, Fang Yuan was still full of vigor, while Zhengling was starting to get anxious, he was unable to hold on. Oh no! The other party must be using our immortal essence stones and converting it into immortal essence. In contrast, we have lost a lot of our foundation after an intense battle, so we are the first to run out of immortal essence. Realizing the reason, Zhou Zhong felt an immense anger and melancholy, it was hard to describe with words. At the same time, he started to fluster, what shall we do now? If I want to help him, I can only use healing methods, otherwise, we would be violating the duel agreement, and the earlier duels would be voided. He was there physically, but he felt like he was miles away, Zhou Zhong was helpless. The trap that Fang Yuan had created painstakingly was taking effect. At times, your former achievements would be the greatest obstacle for you to achieve greater success. If they won this round, they would obtain complete victory. They would save all of the Feathermen and bring them to safety. They were one duel away, just one duel. If they violated the rules, all of it would be nullified. This mentality made Zhengling choose to continue holding on, and Zhou Zhong was full of sweat and worried, but he could not interfere. It is over. Fang Yuan laughed loudly. 7 other Strength Path Giant hands flew out. The Strength Path Giant hands slammed at the Feathermen on the ground with overwhelming force. What are you doing? Zhou Zhong howled. He was like a furious dragon whose scales were plucked. Don't fall into his trap, he is trying to lure you into attacking so that you will break the rules. The other part is at his wit's end, we need to continue enduring. Zhengling shouted. Zhou Zhong was stunned, his gaze towards Fang Yuan changed. Aren't immortal zombies slow in cognition? Why is this guy so scheming? While he was stunned, Fang Yuan approached Zhengling and spat at him. Immortal killer move, poison spit. This was a modified immortal killer move that originated from harboring malicious heart, using woman's heart immortal Gu as the core. Since Fang Yuan had obtained it, he had been keeping it secret. This was the first time he was using it. Zhengling was caught off guard, he was poisoned by this immediately. He had a method to heal himself, of course, but at this moment, his mind was distracted and he reacted a moment more slowly. By the time he was going to detoxify himself, the poison was already very deep. The moment of life and death was often decided in an instant. Unscrupulous. Zhengling stared at Fang Yuan fixedly. This was his last word. With a loud thud, he lost control and was squashed into meat paste by the Strength Path Giant hands. Lord Zhengling! Zhou Zhong screamed in fury. Everything happened too quickly. By the time Zhou Zhong reacted, it was too late. He did not have an immortal Gu like man as before. Fang Yuan attacked Zhou Zhong with his other Strength Path Giant hands. You cannot defend, attack or dodge. Don't forget, according to this duel's rules, you can only use healing methods. Fang Yuan shouted. Zhou Zhong heard this and his eyes almost popped out. He was going to spit out blood from anger. How would he fight like that? He would have to retaliate, dodge, or defend himself, but all those violated the rules. It would nullify all of their past wins. On his side, the one in charge of attacking and defending, Zhengling, was dead. He could only use healing methods now. But once the Strength Path Giant hands grabbed him, he would be killed on the spot. No healing techniques were going to save him. Even if Fang Yuan could not kill him and he could heal himself, he could not retaliate. That was against the rules. Fang Yuan was assured to win. This was truly bullying the Feathermen. At this moment, looking at Zhou Zhong's dazed expression, even Tai Bai Yunxing showed a look of pity and sympathy. Chapter 868, Gu Immortal Slave. At the moment between life and death, the remaining Gu Immortal, Zhou Zhong, had a burst of inspiration. He realized the most direct way to change the current situation. I admit defeat. He shouted. Fang Yuan's attacks came to a stop. Zhou Zhong was breathing roughly. In just a moment, he was drenched in sweat. The tens of thousands of Feathermen on the ground reacted. After a while, they shouted in shock. In just moments, the rank 7 Gu Immortal of the Feathermen died, and Zhou Zhong had no choice but to admit defeat. Fang Yuan's meticulous plotting showed its ruthless effect. The Feathermen paid a heavy price. They lost terribly. This was a completely different situation from earlier. The difference was like of heaven and earth. It was no wonder that the Feathermen were shocked. Zhou Zhong's expression was pale. He felt some trepidation internally as he spoke. I lost. According to the agreement, the 10 duels are over. we are going to leave this place. His gaze towards Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng was filled with deep hatred and anger. The other party killed the Featherman Gu immortal Jingling, but now, Zhou Zhong had insufficient strength, he could not exact revenge. How could he take revenge? If Jingling was still alive, if he collaborated with Zhou Zhong, they would definitely suppress Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng. This was the truth. Jingling and Zhou Zhong had very deep foundations, out of Fang Yuan's expectations. They might not have many immortal Gu, but they had deduced many immortal killer moves. These immortal killer moves encompassed attack, defense, movement, healing, and investigation. They did not have any apparent shortfalls. In contrast, Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng used mostly mortal killer moves. If they really fought, it would be hard for them to gain any advantage as they would be inferior in these aspects. Of course, this was Tai Bai blessed land, Fang Yuan's side had the territorial advantage. But do not forget, blessed lands could not restrict immortal Gu and immortal killer moves. Thus, Zhou Zhong could only suppress his anger as well as the desire to take revenge. He decided to not settle the score with Fang Yuan for now. The urgent matter now was to escape and find a new place to live with his clansmen. Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng could not stop him from making that request. The reason was simple. They had used the information path immortal killer move earlier. Once Fang Yuan's side did something that violates the agreement, they would face a harsh backlash, they would die on the spot. Fang Yuan was not like Fairy Li Shan, he did not have a time path killer move like delay with him. Thus, he could not break the agreement. In fact, Zhou Zhong was very conscious of this, he was hoping that Fang Yuan would violate the agreement. If that happens, the enemies would be wiped out, and this blessed land would become the Feathermen's property. Regarding the condition for ownership from Tai Bai land spirit, that would be something to think about later. Of course, Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng could not attack, they also could not summon outsiders like Fairy Li Shan and He Lu Lan to interfere. Even though the Feathermen did not have the intelligence of humans, such an obvious loophole would still be handled. If Fang Yuan summoned reinforcements, he would be violating the agreement, he would die. Indeed, the 10 duels have ended, according to our earlier agreement, we have to open the doors and let the remaining Feathermen leave. Fang Yuan nodded, saying to Zhou Zhong, "Don't worry, we won't go back on our words." Good. Zhou Zhong let out a breath of cloudy air, he felt much regret towards Fang Yuan's act of keeping his word. But Fang Yuan's words shifted. But what? Zhou Zhong looked at him nervously. Fang Yuan laughed lightly, "We won the 10th duel, according to the rules, I can choose slaves from among the Feathermen on the ground, and the rest will be allowed to leave." Zhou Zhong sighed, he looked at the clansmen on the ground, feeling very complicated, his fingers were stabbing into his flesh. Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng descended as they started picking slaves from among these Feathermen. The Feathermen were flustered, they were afraid of getting chosen. "Don't move, let me choose properly," Fang Yuan purposely shouted. The Feathermen were even more fearful now, they were like chicks in front of an eagle. This girl is not bad." Fang Yuan pretended to think about it, he beckoned with his finger as a young girl was restrained by a formless force, pulled towards him from the Featherman group. "No, I don't want to." The Featherman girl's eyes oozed with tears of helplessness. "Let go of my fiancée." A young Featherman charged up before any of the Feathermen could stop him. Fang Yuan's eyes shined with a ruthless light, he snorted, "Courting death." He did not make any evident movements, but the Featherman youngster, who was merely a rank 2 Gu master, froze in the air as he was flying, his face distorted as his body went into spasms. At the next moment, he fell onto the ground. Even though he was caught by the surrounding feathermen, blood was running rampant in his entire body, his 7 orifices were bursting with blood, he was going to die. What did you do? Zhou Zhong was furious, he landed on the ground and pressed on the Featherman youngster's chest, healing him personally. The Featherman youngster was hit by Fang Yuan's blood path methods, his blood ran wild and spurted outside. But with Zhou Zhong's suppression, the attack was resolved and the Featherman youngster's life was saved. Zhou Zhong raised his head and looked at Fang Yuan, his expression was dark. Sir, you attacked a mortal, that is insulting to the status of a Gu immortal. And I remember that in the agreement, you are not to freely attack or kill our feathermen. Fang Yuan shrugged, Gu immortals have their status, but even more than that, their authority is not to be offended. I did not violate the agreement, he was the one who had intentions to attack me. It is stated in the agreement clearly that if the mortal feathermen attempt to attack me, I have the rights to kill them. Isn't that right? Zhou Zhong could not reply to this. In terms of playing around rules, Fang Yuan was much stronger than him. Fang Yuan laughed heartily, don't worry, I will not violate the agreement. Zhou Zhong gritted his teeth, his eyes were spewing fire. Then I will choose you as my next slave, Zhou Zhong. Suddenly, Fang Yuan pointed at Zhou Zhong, he showed a smile, like his scheme had succeeded. What did you say? At this moment, Zhou Zhong almost thought that he was hearing things. He wanted a Gu immortal to become his slave. How could this be possible? Zhou Zhong looked at Fang Yuan in disbelief, did the other party go crazy? Fang Yuan said with a smile, Zhou Zhong, did you forget? Our agreement was, as long as my side wins, I can choose a portion of these feathermen on the ground and make them into my slaves. Fang Yuan placed an emphasis on the words, on the ground. Zhou Zhong felt like a thunderbolt had struck him, he was stunned on the spot, not moving at all. The surrounding feathermen were no longer flustered and jumping around, they were frozen like statues, staring at their Gu immortal, staring at his feet. Zhou Zhong was stepping on the ground. At this moment, Zhou Zhong's expression was very interesting, it turned from pale as paper to dark and solemn. His wings fluttered subconsciously, he wanted to raise his legs as if the floor was lava, it was burning his legs. He. Fang Yuan laughed in a monstrous manner, a crafty light was shining in his red eyes, the moment you stepped on the ground, you became my slave. Zhou Zhong, even if you fly now, it is too late. Zhou Zhong shouted at Fang Yuan, this is a trap. This is an evil plot. Fang Yuan laughed heartily, he showed a look of smugness and shamelessness, that is right, this is a trap, this is an evil plot. Unfortunately, you fell for it. Beside him, Tai Bai Yunxing sighed, you can only blame yourselves for neglecting your own bodies. Indeed, the authority of Gu immortals cannot be offended, it is rare for slaves to be Gu immortals. When we set the agreement, you were both flying in the air, away from the ground, thus you did not notice this trap. Of course, if you realized it and did not step on the ground, there was also nothing we could do. But you had a guilty conscience, you wanted to sacrifice a portion of the feathermen and let them become slaves so as to obtain freedom for you and the rest of the feathermen. Cough, cough. Fang Yuan coughed, old Bai, even if he did not land on the ground, I still have my ways. We can pick our slaves slowly, we can take a year or two and directly cripple the feathermen. They need food and water to survive, but Tai Bai blessed land is yours, due to the agreement, they cannot inflict any damage on the blessed land, as long as we do not pick our slaves, they will be prisoners inside the blessed land. This time, even Tai Bai Yunxing looked at Fang Yuan with shock. Zhou Zhong opened his mouth wide, at this moment, he felt that he was simply too foolish and naive. Chapter 869, Freedom of the Feathermen. The whole area was covered in deathly silence. Sorrow, fear and loss shrouded the hearts of all the feathermen. Zhou Zhong was the only Gu immortal remaining among the feathermen. If even he was no longer there, and became a slave of humans, how would these remaining feathermen survive? The current 5 regions, or rather, the whole world, could be said to belong to humans. The space for variant humans to survive was very small, and this already small space continued to shrink. Zhou Zhong's mouth, wide open from shock, slowly closed. He looked up at Fang Yuan, as if he was looking at a monster, and asked, "Is your immortal zombie appearance fake? How can an immortal zombie scheme all this?" Fang Yuan was slightly dazed, not having expected Zhou Zhong to suddenly calm down. He immediately had a bad feeling. Tai Bai Yun Sheng, who was beside him, spoke with compassion, "Give up, Zhou Zhong. Even if you become a slave, I can promise that you will never be treated unfairly. I will also not limit your freedom during normal times. I will only ask for your service during critical times. Let these feathermen behind you live in my blessed land from now on. Rest assured, I will not be harsh on them or maltreat them. I will also pay corresponding rewards for their work." Sigh. Tai Bai Yun Sheng heaved a sigh, his benevolent nature had emerged again. However, Zhou Zhong shook his head slightly 3 times. The smile on the corners of Fang Yuan's lips disappeared as his expression turned grave. Afterwards, he saw that the Gu immortal Zhou Zhong suddenly turned around towards the large group of feathermen, and gave a deep bow. "Everyone." Zhou Zhong's tone was extremely calm, but it revealed a decisive intent. His voice was not loud, but it resounded in everyone's ears. "I have done all of you a disservice. This world only has the Gu immortal Zhou Zhong, the featherman Zhou Zhong, but there will absolutely not be a slave Zhou Zhong. It was truly a shame that I could not protect you all. Goodbye." He then suddenly spread his wings. The wings of feathermen were not wide like eagle wings or thick like vulture wings, but were slender and exquisite. "Zhou Zhong, what is the point of this? Stop quickly." Tai Bai Yun Sheng was shocked, and wanted to stop him. But how could he stop a Gu immortal who was seeking death of his own accord? Zhou Zhong suddenly flapped his wings and flew towards the sky. While flying towards the sky, he shouted, "I, Zhou Zhong, am a featherman. I will not become a slave." At this moment, everyone's gazes were gathered on him. He violated the agreement. He stepped on the ground and was successfully trapped by Fang Yuan, becoming a slave. However, Zhou Zhong was not willing and went against the agreement on his own initiative. The information path immortal killer move on him erupted, the intense backlash that he could not endure assaulted Zhou Zhong's entire body. The more Zhou Zhong flew, the slower he became, his 2 wings were also becoming difficult to move. Right now, his appearance of flying in the sky was like that of an old man who was approaching death and stumbling on his legs but still kept on climbing towards a precipitous peak. His whole body started crystallizing rapidly, and soon he turned into a transparent glass crystal statue. His 2 wings turned into crystal glass-like objects, moving no longer. However, his eyes were still gazing at the blue sky, not even sparing a glance at Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yun Sheng, the gaze carrying endless bravery and decisiveness. He then started to slowly fall down to the ground. His whole body started to crumble apart while falling. First his head, then his chest, his wings, stomach, then his legs. Before landing on the ground, he had already turned into a sheet of broken glass and crystal fragments. There was no wind in Tai Bai blessed land. These crystal glass fragments, however, seemed to flutter. The more they fluttered, the more they crumbled. They continued to break apart until they disintegrated in the air. "Zhou Zhong." Tai Bai Yun Sheng mumbled in a daze. "Indeed, this guy. Fang Yuan's expression was dark. He did not make Tai Bai Yunxing revive Zhou Zhong. One who was not afraid of even death and was not willing to be a slave, simply had no value. Moreover, Zhou Zhong was a Gu immortal, the immortal essence needed to revive him would not be low. Even if he was revived, his immortal Gu were already gone, and Tai Bai Yunxing also would not be able to absorb his immortal aperture. On the contrary, it was better to let him die. His immortal aperture would be unable to absorb heaven and earth qi, the blessed land would break apart. After breaking up, all the Tao marks of Zhou Zhong in the immortal aperture would be added to Tai Bai blessed land. Zhou Zhong's death caused all the feathermen to fall into silence. The silence only lasted for a while, before the new Featherman King, Yu Fei, shouted loudly, "I, Yu Fei, also am not willing to be a slave." Everybody, have you still not realized it? These two human Gu immortals are demons, they had already planned to catch us all. They absolutely won't let us go. All of you, choose a new Featherman King. I will follow old ancestor Zhou Zhong and take my leave first. After saying that, he suicided on the spot. Our king. The feathermen roused, shouting in such fury that their voices shook the surrounding areas. Right, there are no slave feathermen in this world, there are only free feathermen. Even if I die, I am free. As long as our hearts beat for freedom, there will not be any slave feathermen. Take our corpses as your slaves. The feathermen shouted, howled, muttered or ridiculed. Zhou Zhong and Yu Fei's actions inspired the feathermen, unexpectedly, they all chose to suicide. Damn it, are you still not stopping them? A bunch of mortals, humph. Tai Bai Yunxing, quickly use man as before, we cannot forego this wealth. We will make them unable to die even if they want to. Fang Yuan snorted. However, Tai Bai Yunxing showed no signs of movement. Tai Bai Yunxing, what are you doing? Fang Yuan turned around, and was immediately shocked. Tai Bai Yunxing's face was filled with struggle and hesitation, he said to Fang Yuan with difficulty, Fang Yuan, there are two voices shouting in my head right now. One voice tells me to be logical and raise these feathermen as slaves. The other voice, however, is shouting loudly for me to give up, these feathermen are true feathermen, they cannot be disgraced, even feeling sympathy for them is a humiliation towards them. As he said this, Tai Bai Yunxing's eyes were unexpectedly glistening with tears. Damn it! An eerie light imperceptibly flashed past Fang Yuan's eyes without anyone noticing. If these feathermen were raised as slaves, it would be a great help to Fang Yuan's plans in Western Desert as well. But at this crucial moment, Tai Bai Yunxing's heart actually softened. Fang Yuan could not help but shout furiously in his mind, this fool, I can't scheme with him. As he said this internally, he suddenly grabbed Tai Bai Yunxing's shoulder with his monstrous arm. The words that came from his mouth, however, were very different. Let it be, old Bai, you are correct. These feathermen are the true feathermen from the legends of Renzu, you don't need to hesitate, you can let them die for freedom. Fang Yuan. Tai Bai Yunxing's expression immediately relaxed as he looked gratefully at the immortal zombie before him, and said with some shame, it was not easy for you to think of this plan, but in the end, because of me. Fang Yuan interrupted him, don't mention it. Everyone has their own principles. Although I don't approve of it, I can understand it. I will support you. Fang Yuan. Tai Bai Yunxing's voice was choked with emotions, and he almost teared up. Fang Yuan spoke in a profound voice, do you know why those two Featherman Gu immortals fell to my scheme? Hehe, do you remember that I obtained the wisdom path inheritance from Dong Fang Chang Fan? You mean? Tai Bai Yunxing stared blankly. Fang Yuan sighed, wisdom path methods are indeed incredibly hard to defend against effectively. Fortunately, there have always been very few wisdom path Gu immortals. I now have a complete wisdom path inheritance, we must not fail to take measures against such methods. Old Bai, although you passed the earthly calamity, don't be in a hurry to go to Eastern Sea. I will use some wisdom path methods on you to deal with other wisdom path Gu immortals. Tai Bai Yunsheng was extremely moved, bowing at Fang Yuan, then I shall trouble you. We are family, there is no need for thanks. Fang Yuan dismissed it indifferently, his gaze once again landing on the ground. In just a few moments, all the feathermen on the ground had suicided, there was not even one who wanted to remain alive. Fang Yuan momentarily showed a slightly moved expression. The feathermen seeking death of their own accord made him recall a person in the depths of his memories. In fact, this person was also a featherman. When Fang Yuan was still a mortal Gu master in his previous life, this featherman, who was an assassin, tried to kill Fang Yuan multiple times. One who understands you even more than friends is often your enemy. Fang Yuan remembered that one time during a difficult battle, he had discovered the secret of this strong assassin who repeatedly tried to kill him. This assassin was not a human, but a featherman. You are a featherman. Your wings have been cut off. That is so sad. Fang Yuan used a verbal attack. I myself cut off this pair of wings. The featherman assassin laughed sinisterly, do you want to know why? Fang Yuan's expression slightly changed, why? Because the Featherman village's chief always praised me, saying I am a Featherman genius that came by once in 100 years, the pillar of the Featherman village, a flying quasi-grandmaster and whatnot. It was truly annoying. The chief always warned me that I am a Featherman and I am part of the village. I wanted to leave the village to see the world, not only did the chief dissuade me, even all the Feathermen in the village stopped me. I know they were afraid I would reveal the location of the village and attract human slave hunters. So, one day, I could not withstand it any longer and cut off my wings. Then on that very day, I killed all the Feathermen in the village. As he said this Featherman assassin's expression was one of pride, he smiled lightly. What? Fang Yuan was shocked. The Featherman assassin shrugged indifferently, you have read the legends of Renzu, right? Feathermen believe in freedom. My heart for freedom only happened to be dozens of times more vigorous than ordinary Feathermen. My Featherman identity bound me, so I cut off my wings. The village I grew up in and the villagers constrained me, so I killed them. Because in this world, no one can restrict my freedom. Fang Yuan's expression immediately turned heavy and he was on full alert. Back then, he had yet to tread on the demonic path, immediately he shouted, you lunatic. Ha. The Featherman assassin laughed loudly, thanks for the compliment. He added, actually, you and I are of the same kind. Who the hell is the same kind as you? Fang Yuan's young face showed a furious expression, as he shouted and pounced forward to fight. Chapter 870, Freedom Gu. States, Renzu walked on his own road of life. After separating with the hairy man leader, he encountered Feathermen in Green Heaven. Renzu was extremely happy when he saw these Feathermen. Because Feathermen had wings on their back, and since the Feathermen could understand Renzu's words, both sides could communicate. Renzu requested the Feathermen, please help me. My daughter is in ordinary abyss and cannot come out. Please fly down and rescue my daughter, let us father and daughter reunite. The Feathermen laughed loudly, human, how can you order us? Us Feathermen are the most free living beings in the world, no one can order us or bind us. You want us to listen to your request and follow your wish, that is impossible. Renzu kept on persuading, and even pleaded with them, but the Feathermen simply kept on flying in the air, enjoying the pleasure of freedom. Renzu's mouth had already dried, but the feathermen only treated him as a clown, ridiculing Renzu as if they were looking at a joke. Oh look, such a pitiful human. So what if he is the life form with the most intelligence in the world? He doesn't have wings and can only walk on the ground, he is so pitiful. Fortunately, I am not a human, but a featherman. See how vigorously I can fly. In Renzu's heart of loneliness, Gu started getting angrier as it heard these words. Finally it could not hold the anger back and jumped out. All of you, come down. Gu displayed its might, capturing all the feathermen in the sky at once. Renzu could not help but become greatly startled at this. Gu, when did you become so strong? Gu said proudly, it is only natural. I took a bite out of strength Gu, now that I have my own strength, I possess immense might. Moreover, there is no need to pay any price to use this strength. Human, you need to know, what is most reliable is your own strength. And without strength, freedom is just an illusion. The feathermen were captured and could no longer fly to the sky, pressed onto the ground without being able to move. They began to throw curses at Renzu and Gu in anger. Renzu heaved a sigh, feathermen, I did not mean to offend you. Please forgive my rudeness. I only want to ask you to save my daughter. When I reunite with her, I will definitely reward you. Impossible. We feathermen are the most free. Even if our bodies lose freedom, our hearts are still free. Right, right. Cruel human, you can't impose your will on any featherman. The feathermen kept on shouting without any intention to compromise. Renzu persuaded them for 3 days and 3 nights, but it was in vain. Helpless, he could only let go of these feathermen. Gu spoke bitterly, human, how could you release them so easily? Don't you want to rescue your 4th child? Renzu, however, replied confidently, I have already understood that these feathermen cannot be forced. After these days of contact with the feathermen, I have found these feathermen might be free but they don't have dens to shelter themselves from wind and rain, and they also don't have enough food to fill their stomachs. To make them help, I have to make them do it willingly. Thereupon, Renzu built a house near the feathermen. Every day, he relied on Gu to gather a lot of wild fruits and hunt many beasts. The feathermen soon discovered the safety and warmth of the house. Especially during the days of storms, the feathermen could only hide in groves of trees, shivering and starving. While Renzu stayed within his house, enjoying the warmth of a fireplace and sumptuous food. On one cold night, some feathermen quietly moved under the roof of Renzu's house, to evade the wind and snow, while also greedily absorbing the warmth leaking out from the crack in the door. Renzu wore the mask of Attitude Gu and opened the door, using an extremely warm attitude to invite these feathermen into the house, and to enjoy the warmth and food with him. As this repeated several times, more and more feathermen came into Renzu's house. Renzu was very hospitable and would entertain the feathermen every day, even giving the area near the fireplace to the feathermen. No matter how much the feathermen ate, he let them eat without restraint. The feathermen gradually became accustomed to living this way, until one day, Renzu saw the timing was ripe and took off Attitude Gu, revealing his true, cold expression. He shut the door of the house and stored all the food as well, no longer supplying them to the feathermen for free. The feathermen were caught off guard and were frantic. They were already used to the safety and warmth of the house, they were used to plentiful food, they rarely flew now and hunted even less. Their stockpile of food was extremely small. Many feathermen were fat to the extent they could not fly. The feathermen had no way to deal with Renzu's behavior. They could not beat Renzu, who possessed Gu. Soon, all the feathermen reached a situation where they would die from hunger or the cold. Several days later, many feathermen died. Renzu waited and waited until he became extremely anxious, as the Feathermen showed no signs of coming to terms with him. In the end, when most of the Feathermen died, Renzu could not help but mention the old matter again. Feathermen, as long as you move your wings to fly to ordinary abyss and rescue my daughter, I will give you enough food and also warm houses. However, the remaining Feathermen still shook their heads. Eventually, they all died. From these Feathermen's corpses, many small creatures flew out. They looked like tiny specks of light, shining with all kinds of colors. Renzu tried to grab them, but was not able to. It is no use. Cognition Gu informed him at this moment, wild freedom Gu cannot be caught. These Feathermen chased after freedom since their birth, but it is a pity that only after their death could they find freedom. Central Continent, Hu Immortal Blessed Land, Dang Hun Palace. Fang Yuan slowly withdrew his monstrous arm. The Featherman Gu Immortal Zhengling's soul, however, was extremely listless as it weakly floated in the air. Gu Immortal Zhou Zhong had violated the agreement, thus his soul was already extinguished. As for Zhengling, who had died first, because he had only been attacked by Fang Yuan with Poison Path and Strength Path killer moves, only his body had perished and his soul had been preserved. Fang Yuan had secretly stored his soul into his immortal aperture on the spot. Since ancient times, Soul Path, Wisdom Path and Enslavement Path were closely related. Since Fang Yuan had obtained Dong Fang Chang Fan's Wisdom Path inheritance, he also gained some comprehension of the other paths, as such his attainment in Soul Path and Enslavement Path had also increased by a bit. Most of all, Fang Yuan had used the light of wisdom to repeatedly improve the immortal killer move Myriad Self, not only adding a few core immortal Gu one after another, but also adding many Soul Path mortal Gu. This coordination made it so that when the giant hand killed the enemy, the injured soul would be captured by Fang Yuan. If others did not pay attention, they would think Fang Yuan had destroyed the soul as well. But in fact, Fang Yuan secretly captured the soul. Even Tai Bai Yunxing did not sense this as he did not have an immortal level investigative killer move. Fang Yuan also did not inform him. The value of a Gu Immortal's soul was far higher than a Gu Immortal's will or mortal souls. Fang Yuan had just ended his first soul search. From this soul search, he learned the origin of this group of Feathermen. They are a Featherman clan in Western Desert, living for generations in a fragment world of green heaven. No wonder they have such ancient customs, even suiciding rather than lowering their heads to become slaves. A life of peace with plentiful resources, a united clan without any powerful external enemies, this instead corroded the minds of these Feathermen. White Sea Shatua, who is this person? He was able to gather so many people to siege Sacred Feather City. Moreover, he was using such superior means that are beyond imagination. They could actually restrict an immortal Gu house, causing the Feathermen to flee in desperation. Fang Yuan rummaged through his mind, but could not find any information about White Sea Shatua. In the end, Fang Yuan could only sigh. Western Desert is also a place hiding dragons and tigers. In conclusion, the benefits from this tribulation in Tai Bai Blessed Land were huge. Tai Bai Yunxing received all the Dao marks of the two Featherman Gu Immortals, a rank 6 and a rank 7, he was the biggest winner. Fang Yuan's harvests were also not small. The origin of this group of Feathermen was a big deal, and there was also Sacred Feather City. The origins could be traced back to the late Antiquity era, the era of spectral soul demon Venerable. As the leader of Sacred Feather City, the rank 7 Gu Immortal, Zhengling, held plenty of secrets, immortal killer moves, immortal Gu recipes and so on. It was likely he even had a complete Gu Immortal inheritance. The Green Heaven Fragment World was isolated from the outside world for this long. Sacred Feather City could be said to be a paradise for Feathermen. This was a huge settlement of Feathermen among those remaining in the world. Because they had very few interactions with the outside world, and the Green Heaven Fragment world had plenty of resources. These Featherman Gu immortals' methods were quaint, having distinctive characteristics of the late antiquity era. Fang Yuan even had an expectation: if his luck was good, maybe he could get a strength path inheritance from Zhengling's soul. The only pity was those mortal feathermen. Fang Yuan had been planning to raise those feathermen as slaves to help him penetrate the market in Western Desert, or even establish a caravan. Feathermen were high-quality slaves in Western Desert. Super forces and large forces, all of them had featherman-based caravans. It was impossible for Fang Yuan to only do business with Shao clan. In the early stage, he indeed had to rely on Shao clan as a springboard to stably enter Western Desert's market. But Fang Yuan would suffer losses if he only engaged with Shao clan on the long term. But these mortal feathermen were dead already. From their temperament, they were too well pampered and it would be an arduous process to tame them. Instead, it was much more convenient to directly purchase featherman slaves. Fang Yuan was not someone who dwelled on the past, and soon threw this matter to the back of his mind. He already possessed change form Immortal Gu and had fused it into the Immortal Killer move, vaguely familiar face. Fang Yuan originally intended to change into another appearance to go to Northern Plains Zombie Alliance and continue his previous foiled plan. But after contacting Fairy Li Shan, Fang Yuan analyzed and deduced that the situation was not good. Ever since Feng Jiugu had investigated the identity of Sha Huang, Northern Plains Zombie Alliance was much more strict in examining any unknown immortal zombie that wanted to join the alliance. It was no longer as easy as before for Fang Yuan to infiltrate into Northern Plains Zombie Alliance. And Feng Jiugu, Old Lord Ken Yang, and the rest of the group had gone into hiding, which made Fang Yuan feel that a storm was brewing. Fang Yuan hesitated. Was he still going to follow the plan to make his way into Northern Plains Zombie Alliance under this situation?